Okay, I'm Janice Sellinger. I'm the Executive Director of Crossroads of the American Revolution National Heritage Area, and we're thrilled that you're here with us today. We see that a number of people who have attended our workshops, in-person workshops in the past are here with us, as well as some people that are new to Crossroads. So we're really thrilled that you're here today to join us. We would like to ask you to please mute yourself if you're not already muted. And if you have questions, to put them in the chat box. What we are doing today is Crossroads does offer a number of workshops during the year, and normally they are in-person workshops. But obviously due to COVID-19, we are offering this one as a virtual workshop, and the topic is basically due to some of what we found out from the site assessment that was done of the 150 Revolutionary War sites in the state of New Jersey as part of our project for the 250th planning with the New Jersey Historical Commission. And part of that, some of the results focused on visitor readiness and customer service. And so one of our main speakers today is Cheryl Hargrove, who was a heritage tourism specialist, internationally and nationally known, president of Hargrove International, and she was part of the consulting team that did that site assessment. So we will hear from Cheryl a little bit later in the program. We will also hear from Mark Nonestied, who is the division head of Middlesex County Division of Historic Sites and History Services. And many of you, if you did go to our in-person workshops, met Mark at East Jersey Old Town, as well as a number of other places. We saw him at the Monmouth Battlefield the last time we were able to do that last year. And, you know, Mark is going to talk a little bit about some of what they're doing at their site as an example. And now I'm really thrilled to introduce Jeff Vasser, who is Executive Director of the New Jersey Division of Travel and Tourism. And Jeff has been working closely with us as we talk about what can be done in New Jersey about heritage tourism. So again, please mute yourself if you are attending as an attendee of this, and feel free to pose your questions in the chat box. And thank you very much for being with us this morning. Jeff?
Thank you, Janice, and good morning, everybody. I'm honored to be here, and selfishly, I'm thrilled that we're putting a tourism and customer service aspect to the heritage tourism industry, if you will. Hard to believe, but in only 6 short years, the semi-quincentennial will be upon us. Some of you may be wondering, why are we starting so soon? And we've got plenty of time for all this, but let me assure you that 6 years is going to fly by, and there's so much that we need to do and talk about between now and then. I think I could speak for most, if not all of us, when I say that we want New Jersey to be at the forefront of this commemoration. I feel that nobody has more than us, and I'm certainly not willing to cede the leadership to Massachusetts or Virginia or Pennsylvania for that matter. I think New Jersey has so much to offer, and all of you are a huge part of that. So with that said, we want to start promoting. We want to start getting people in the mindset that the celebration and the commemoration is going to be just in 6 short years. We want to start promoting it, and we want to start bringing our guests in sooner. We certainly want to have them here in 2020, 2021, 23, of course in 26, but then in 2030 and beyond as well. So the reason we want to get started early and bring people here earlier is to allow us to see if we are indeed visitor ready when the throngs of people start coming in 2026. We want to be able to test, if you will, how our marketing strategies are working, how the improvements that we've made to not only our marketing, but to the physical plant of your sites. How have those improvements been welcomed by your visitors? And how are our offerings being received? And most importantly, between now and then, we want to make sure that we have delivered best-in-class customer service to get these folks to come back. If they come in 2021, they had a lousy experience, they're not going to come back. So we want to do everything that we can to make sure that people have a great time and they come back multiple times. And we all have our part to play. For us at the New Jersey Division of Travel and Tourism, what we want to do is reintroduce New Jersey to our visitors with basically another tool in our toolkit, heritage tourism. We want to attract new visitors. We want to diversify our visitor base. And heritage tourism for us needs to be a much larger share of our visitors. I know Cheryl's going to get into this in her presentation, but let me just say that the heritage tourist is more affluent, stays longer, and basically is more valuable to us as a tourism entity. And as I said, I know Cheryl's going to get into that in detail. But my boss, Secretary of State Way, she wants to make sure that heritage tourism, the other arts and cultural attractions, the culinary, the agritourism, the ecotourism, all of these things are as iconic as the Jersey Shore is. So this is a huge opportunity for us to make heritage tourism one of the top reasons people come to New Jersey, because we want to keep people here longer. The longer someone stays, obviously, the more money they're going to spend. And for you, if somebody's only here for a day and they only have a few hours to spare, they only have time to stop by what the report that was done. They will stop by what's called an attractor. You're all familiar with the attractors and who you are. But if we are able to have somebody come here and stay longer and not be rushed, they're going to stop by what we consider or call the community resource. The more time people have, the more they're going to visit other sites, the more they're going to stop in restaurants and other attractions, et cetera, et cetera. But for us, U.S. Travel, which is basically the nation's Visitor and Tourism Association, estimates that the cost to attract a new visitor is in excess of 10 times of what it costs to keep an existing visitor longer. So think about that. We would save so much money by just putting our efforts into keeping people here longer than it would be to get an entirely new visitor. So we will market heritage tourism this year, starting this year. We're going to create itineraries, and we're going to work with Janice and her team at Crossroads and at the New Jersey Historical Commission to create maps and web links, social media campaigns, PR and media opportunities. So that's what we're going to do our part to certainly make sure people are coming longer. What can you do? You could certainly help us keep them coming back and keep them coming here. And you could do that in two ways. The first is by providing great customer service. As the old expression that you've all heard goes, you only have one shot to make a great first impression. One quote that you might not be familiar with was by the late, great Maya Angelou. And she said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's one way that we can assure that people are going to come back to your site, they're going to tell their friends and family about you, and talk about you on the social media and travel sites. We're going to help you invest in your staff and your volunteers through programs that will be introduced over the next several months and years, and I hope you'll take advantage of it. When I talk about customer service to hospitality managers, the comment I get back so often is, well, it's expensive because I train the people leave, and then I have to start the training all over again. In response, I always quote the late Zig Ziglar, who was a motivational speaker, who had a great line. And his line was, the only thing worse than training employees and losing them is not training them and keeping them. So think about that. It's a lot more expensive not to train them. So please take advantage of the training that's going to be offered, and it certainly starts with Cheryl's presentation today, because that'll give you a competitive advantage. And the second way that you can help is through partnerships. When people travel, as I said earlier, they want to experience all an area has to offer. That means not only your site, but they want to take in the great restaurants, a cool music spot, a historic bed and breakfast. So someone is more likely to visit an off the beaten path attraction if they know they can make a full day or overnight out of it. So partner with your area hotels, restaurants, other attractions to create a critical mass of things to do in your area. And the first step in doing this is to reach out to your local destination marketing organization, also known as a DMO or a Convention Visitors Bureau, to find like-minded partners and work with them to create a trail or a marketing campaign or a giveaway that will incentivize people to come visit. So this investment is going to lead to more visitors to your site, more revenue for you, and allow New Jersey to be branded as the premier heritage tourism destination. So selfishly, that's what I want. Hopefully that's what you're going to want. And we're all here for the same purpose. So I hope you enjoyed today's program. Take advantage of these opportunities over the next couple months. And I look forward to meeting many of you in my travels around the state over the next year as we get ready for this. And Jen has asked me to have the high honor of introducing an icon of our industry, someone who is well known, as Jen has said, nationally and internationally in heritage tourism. And we're lucky to have her to be on our team to, help make sure that New Jersey surpasses PA, Massachusetts, Virginia, and all the other heritage states. But we're thrilled to have Cheryl here. And Cheryl, I look forward to hearing what you had to say because it's always, always very informative. So thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And it is my pleasure to be with y'all today. And I just want to echo what Jeff said. I have spent a lot of time in New Jersey. This project that we just recently completed was not my first time to be in New Jersey. I've done some work in Trenton. I've done some work in Morristown and other places. And I am just so amazed every time I visit of what rich resources there are available for visitors, but also just the wonderful hospitality. And that's what I really want to focus on today, is how to share that as you go through hosting visitors. So I'm going to hope that my screen is going to share here, and we'll get started on a few different ways that we can advance customer service in this particular area. So I might actually have, see if I can get my screen sharing. Amy, I may need your help if I can't get it to come up. So
I can have it on deck.
All right. Yeah, it looks like for some reason I'm not sharing. So
all right, here, I got you.
Great. So one of the things that I just wanted to focus on, and a lot of this, as Jeff mentioned and Janice mentioned, is born out of the assessment visits that I conducted, but also through a lot of my 30 years of focus on being involved in the heritage tourism segment and experiences I've had not only in New Jersey, but around the country and around the world. And also listening to the visitor, because that's where I think we really need to focus and making sure that we're looking at the visitor opinions and their importance to helping us deliver our mission, deliver our message, deliver those experiences that will be transformational. So let's get started and talk about first, as Jeff mentioned, heritage tourism and what is it? And Amy, thank you. I always want to bring up this because, as Jeff mentioned, heritage tourism is a very holistic place-based element, and it is not just about one individual site. It is more about an environment, and it looks at the natural, the historic, the cultural, the intangible resources that you can experience, really to help immerse someone in those places and activities that represent the stories and people of the past and present. Very much organic and a reason to travel. which is very important for us as there's now been so many other things, you know. Pine and Gilmore, James Gilmore, who wrote the book on the experience economy, talked about that now, especially with the pandemic, our challenge for tourism is going to make sure that we do more than what you can do at home, and getting people out and working and traveling. So when we're ready to travel, making sure those experiences are exceptional. So let's talk about visitor readiness. Next slide, please. You know, it really does begin with thinking about how each guest is greeted. And I'm wanting to show you a customer journey map that was created by a colleague at actually is at George Washington University. And it really talks about how you can really help that visitor have a positive experience and look forward to your on-site experience at every step. What your website says, how inviting is it, and your social media, how welcoming are those posts. Then also looking at other travel guides, such as the State Travel Guide, the guidebooks, articles, and really what are they saying about you? And then also, as we know from the first impression, you know, what does the entryway look like? Then how are you welcomed at an admission desk? The tours, events, programs, and services that you offer, and even then in the gift shop, the restrooms, the restaurant, if you have those, all of those elements that come together, even as far as then when you exit as well. That really does set the whole lens that we look at when we're talking about a visitor experience, that it is not just, you know, as we think of the program or tour, but the whole environment. Next slide. So I really think that when we looked at what is visitor ready and used our criteria for that, certainly being open to the public is essential. I mean, if you're not open to the public, you know, it's hard to keep people at a place for a length of time. And then that personal interaction is difficult to be able to make recommendations or make connections. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I also think it's very important so that Jeff can market with confidence, and so can Crossroads, that there be regular scheduled hours and days of operations. Hopefully that includes a weekend day. And if it's seasonal, to still be able to be consistent, because that's the one thing that visitors want, is to know that if they plan to travel to a place, that it's going to be open as suggested. And then also to look at, you know, access. Is there sufficient signage? Is it attractive? Is it done well? I mean, I just recently did an assessment through another state, and I will tell you that one of the things that just automatically shut me down on first impression was if a signage was beat up, or if it was faded, or if it had some kind of, you know, was bent or some other kind of disfigurement. And because it looks like, as you would with your own front lawn, if it's not well tended, what does that say about what your experience is going to be inside? We also need to be mindful of being ADA compliant, even as historic sites, of being able to offer visitors to everyone. And I'll go into that in a little bit more. And I should tell you that this presentation is going to be in two different segments. The first is going to be on customer service, but then I also want to give some additional information, because I would be remiss if not taking advantage of the fact that we are in COVID-19. We are dealing with a pandemic. We are dealing with very different situations, but we also are looking at opportunities to be more diverse and be more inclusive, and need to be mindful of what visitors are looking for today. So as we talk about access, it is even as things like parking. Is it safe? You know, is it, you know, and then are there restrooms available? And then safety, looking at those kinds of interior and external lighting, emergency assistance, a crisis communications plan. You know, I think that the pandemic has probably more so than anything else helped us realize the importance of a crisis plan. But also, something have happened on your site. Would you be able to handle that and provide comfort and confidence and safety for your visitors? That then helps as far as providing a more excellent and affirming opportunity for everyone. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we also look at, though, is not just the basics, but we really are about offering the experience, because there is a lot of competition out there. And what is really going to help someone go and be present at a historic site versus maybe some other kind of attraction. And so it is, again, about having a convenient schedule for visitors, also making it varied platforms for delivery. You know, not everybody wants to have a guided tour. Maybe they don't have, maybe they're wanting to do a self-guided tour. Maybe they want to use their phone for additional information. Other ways that you can have people involved is critical to making sure that you're able to attract and host as many people as possible. It does go back to quality, though, and I think that, you know, when we started the Heritage Tourism Program at the National Trust for Historic Preservation 30 years ago, the first principle was to focus on authenticity and quality. And I'm glad that 30 years later, we are still at that same place, because that is so critical to us being able to have those kinds of transformational experiences that people will say, wow, I came away changed, I learned something, and it was relevant to my everyday life today. And then events, when we are able to get back together and convene in a safe manner, you know, looking at how events can help people come back and find a reason to return. And to Jeff's point, you know, making sure that we engage people in that community is so important. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Next, please. So I thought it was important for us to just think about, you know, where you fall in the visitor readiness category. And you may, you know, not agree with this, but I will tell you that it has been vetted. It has also been come through the lens of the visitor. It also comes through a lens of many marketing organizations, because needing to have that consistency, especially for visitor readiness, is important to be able to market with confidence. So next slide, please. So I want to focus now on 10 ways to improve your customer service to win favorable ratings and recognition for excellent, because again, that's what we need to do on a consistent basis in order to make sure that our visitors are satisfied, but even more importantly, they go and share with others about that wonderful experience. It really is a key to engagement. So why is good customer service important? You will see a lot of stats here, and I will tell you that we're going to make these slides available to you. So this PowerPoint presentation is going to be shared after the presentation, as well as another handout with some additional information for resources. But you will see that, you know, a lot of this has to do with the fact that social media now is becoming a key way for people to share what they love, but also what they don't like so much. And we need to be mindful of how good customer service is important to not only our bottom line, but also to making sure that future visitors are going to want to see our sites and experience them based on previous customers. Next slide. So I think that, you know, this sounds so simple, but I will tell you that in many times when I go and do a secret shopper experience, I can't tell you how many times I get ignored when I walk in the door. And, you know, we need to just be mindful that somebody looking up from their desk and saying, hello, welcome, is really the first key. And to Maya Angelou's quote, how you feel, you know, that somebody has recognized you and greeting you. It also gives you a really good opportunity to connect with them. And so greeting visitors on arrival is, I think, the first tip. Second, please. It's also a chance to get to know your visitor. You can ask them questions about where are they from? Have they been here before? What motivated them to visit? Any kind of information like that may help you as far as being able to help them have a better experience. And so being able to really connect with the visitor and understand that they're really not taking you away from maybe another project that you may be involved in or having to do. They're really your core reason. Because if you're not hosting visitors, how are you really meeting your mission of being able to open and share and educate others? They are your audience, and that is very important to consider. Next slide. And we talked about the Heritage Traveler, and one reason that they have become so important, and we see that you know, they are more fluent, they're better educated, but most importantly, they're a frequent traveler, and they have a tendency to spend more and stay longer. And that goes right to Jeff's point about having somebody who will stay in New Jersey for a longer period of time is a really rich opportunity, because that means that you can have 500 people spending $5 or 5 people spending $500, and looking at those kinds of opportunities for growth on the economic impact side. Next, please. It's also important to look at all of the things that they like to do. They like to shop. They like to go exploring in urban neighborhoods. They like to visit art galleries and museums or attend craft festivals. And so they're not just set in. I think most people don't say, today I'm going to be a heritage traveler. Instead, they go, I want to go to a place that's interesting and different, and I'm going to maybe learn something. And so helping them to experience all of those things is what's important. Next, please. I also think it's very important that we talk about positive language in our customer service. And I know that when I started with the National Trust, and actually even before then, when I was working in the tourism industry and I would go to a lot of places, the first sign I saw was no, 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 no. And, that's just not necessarily very inviting, because you felt like, oh my gosh, I need to keep my hands behind my back and not touch anything and not do anything because I'm going to get yelled at. Let's face it, we're in a different world now. And so I think we need to find user-friendly ways to say no if necessary, and help people understand how to be respectful. Visitors don't want to be intrusive or do something wrong. Help them understand why that not handling artifacts or not touching things is important, because then they get the relationship. And this is a perfect example. This is from the Villa Borghese in Italy, but I love it because it's from the 18th century, and it's about how to, experience it. This is what it's a marble slab that is on the front of the entrance, the portico of the museum as you walk in. And it really talks about that we really want to invite people, but we expect you to behave well. And so I share this, that it is a fun way of being able to just consider how you share your rules and regulations for the safety of your guest and the artifacts and everything else, but also to make sure that it's an appropriate experience. Next slide. I also think it's important to make sure that everybody feels important, that they're not an imposition. I'm reminded by one historic site manager I visited with, and they said, well, really what we want people to do is just to drive by and throw money. Well, that's not delivering a good experience, because the experience comes from being in the place and meeting someone who can bring that place to life. And so I think that making visitors feel important is respectful of their time, which is the new currency, but it is also making sure then that they actually feel comfortable asking questions and being involved in the experience. Next slide. We also need to be mindful that not everybody's coming from the same perspective. And so looking at how we can really practice empathy, patience, and consistency. I was treated where I came to a site at 4 o'clock and it was going to close at 5, and I was not welcomed. And, I think that making sure that the person who arrives late for the last tour is given the same kind of courtesy and the same kind of exceptional experience as the person who came at 9 o'clock for the first tour, even though it's been a very long day, is critical, because you don't know where that person has come from, but also they may be the one who is going to really engage and be a champion for your site. And so helping make that consistency is important. And also recognizing, school groups have very different needs than adult learners. And so being able to be empathetic and understanding of all of those different audiences is important. Next. It's also important that we listen. And I think that listening to our visitors, listening to the conversation that goes on as you're involved in a tour or as they're walking around your site is important. how can you help them have a better experience, an optimum experience? If they're speaking a different language, is it that you could say, hey, I've got an app where it translates, or I've got a guide in your native language, or, if there's mobility challenges, hey, we've got benches along the way that'll help you on this path. Being able to listen and to navigate and anticipate their needs really goes a long way in showing positive customer experience. Next. I also think it's making sure that we're really attentive. I oftentimes, especially if there are tours on different hours of the day, or if there's programs scheduled, you say, feel free to walk around at your leisure and stuff, but we really need to make sure that they're not lost in that journey. Make sure that they are, comfortable coming up and asking questions, or if they look puzzled at something, that you're attuned to that there's staff around that can help be involved in that process. And it is very important, I think, that we really look at the fact that we need to, free is still a cost. And just because someone's coming in does not mean that we should provide any less of an experience as if they paid what they pay perhaps at Disney. Next. To Jeff's point, I think it's also important we help connect the dots. Where does this site fit into the grander New Jersey landscape? Where does it fit into your own local community? Where does it also fit into the broader American Revolutionary landscape? Helping connect the dots and helping people understand, even maybe recommendations, maybe they're not familiar with the area. Maybe it's their first time here. That kind of information, say, well, could we, where are you going next? Oh, maybe you can help them navigate that. That kind of assistance. It's that old miracle on 34th Street, Gimbel's and Macy's, of helping someone, find what they're looking for, but also having that context of a broader conversation. And, that's where it does help if there's a great little restaurant down the road, or if there's a great main street to visit, or maybe there's a great hike that they want to take. If it's a beautiful day, those are all kinds of things that, again, extend that experience time that we want to look at. Next slide. And then ask customers for feedback. I really think that this was one of the most revealing things from the assessment that we found. And I will tell you that we were quite surprised that 94 of the 150 sites we looked at had no TripAdvisor rating. So I'm going to ask everyone for a little homework assignment here and challenge you to get your visitors involved in giving you TripAdvisor ratings. And the handout we will be sending to you, Amy will send to you later today, will have some instructions on how to get involved with TripAdvisor and how to make sure that you are listed, even how to do a video of your site, so that you are online with that very powerful customer service tool. Because customer ratings are king right now, and making sure that you are listed is the first step in this. So making sure that you have a vehicle for asking customers for feedback, whether you give them a card to say, here, go to Facebook, or say, like us on Facebook, or go to Instagram, or how to post using a hashtag, helping them be part of this engagement and sharing their good experiences is very important. So I really encourage everyone to make sure that customer feedback is a central part of your customer service plan. It helped also, as Jeff was mentioning, that kind of feedback will give you the ammunition you need to make any changes that are necessary, to maybe offering better experiences or alternative experiences. And customers love to be asked. So being able to provide that is a great opportunity. And finally, I'd like to just follow on what Jeff said. Next slide. Is the need to engage visitors in future activities. And if there's a way to have, and get them to sign up for your newsletter, get them to offer a bounce back coupon, say, come back to a next program and you get 10% off in our gift shop, some way in which to make sure that you are then encouraging a repeat visit or to share with others. I think that's part of a key. And if there is some kind of incentive, that always helps. But it's also important then to make sure you've got a reason for them to come back. And that is then different than perhaps what others have done. And so I think that, if you haven't changed your exhibits in 20 years, or there is no reason to come back, that is then a challenge. And looking at then, can there be an event? Can there be a program? Or can you start, changing exhibits and other kinds of things that really encourage even tours on a different theme that can really help as far as that engagement process. Next. And I think it is finally, though, very important to be really visitor-centric. And I share that Google's 5 stages of travel as a recommendation to consider all of the ways that a customer perceives and engages in travel, from the dreaming phase, which a lot of people have been in during this pandemic, and having virtual tours of your site so that they can think about where they want to go and what they want to do. And then additional research about, well, if I'm going to do an itinerary, what could I really do? What all could I see? How could I explore? And then going and booking, whether that is if they're going to do a driving tour or downloading an itinerary or looking at other information. Then that on-site experiencing, but the final being that sharing phase and making sure that all the customer service tips that you've employed and that training pays off in positive sharing in social media and with other potential guests in future. So now I want to hand it over to Mark Nonestied. And he, as was mentioned, he's the division head of Middlesex County Division of Historic Sites and History Services. I had the pleasure of visiting East Jersey Old Town Village and found probably one of the most engaging and also very positive staff people on site who helped me navigate, who helped me experience and helped me with every question that I had. And that really had a lasting impression. So Mark, I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for having me, and thank all of you for joining in. I first want to start off by saying that certainly the current crisis has impacted much of what we do. So this is a look at what we have been doing, what we hope to get back to, and then also I do have some concluding remarks about the current crisis in my brief presentation here. I want to start off with the Umbrella Institute, the sort of the larger picture. And for those of us that have, a parent institute that we're a part of, I think the larger institutions that we fall under helps or can help provide support for visitor readiness. It helps create that framework that supports the services that we do. East Jersey Old Town and the Cornelius Lau House in our division, we're part of Middlesex County government, which has an overall emphasis on arts, history, and culture, and it places value on what we do at our historic sites. In fact, in 2014, the voters in Middlesex County overwhelmingly approved an arts and cultural trust fund that helps with arts, history, and cultural projects across the county, and one in which we've directly benefited from as well. We as a division we fall within the Department of Business Innovation, Education, and Opportunity. We are placed within an environment that values business, because we're viewed as an economic driver, especially with heritage tourism, which by its very name is something that's visitor-centric. And as Jeff mentioned and noted, it helps provide that critical mass in providing links and connecting the dots to restaurants and shopping and hotels as well. We also have a marketing department. Amy's put up on the screen here actually can go back one, Amy, to the billboard. Yeah, so we have a pretty robust marketing and communications department that has launched a number of all kinds of marketing campaigns, some of which have centered around arts, history, and culture. They've included TV commercials, billboards like you see here. These have been up and down the New Jersey Turnpike. If we go to the next slide, please. These are digital posters that are that I saw at Newark Airport coming back from a trip. This one with Thomas Edison and the light bulb, which was developed in Middlesex County, and where excellence becomes reality. And whether or not you want to believe this really is, our county really is where excellence becomes reality, or where this meets that. What it does show, though, is an emphasis on what we do. And I think that's an important step to reaching our end game in providing a better product for our customers, ultimately our visitors. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll dive into the site. East Jersey Old Town is located in Piscataway along River Road in Johnson Park, which is part of the Middlesex County Park System. We're a collection of historic structures that were relocated to the park back in the 1970s and 80s. These were buildings that were threatened with demolition, and a group of people got together to really grassroots effort to relocate these structures. They're buildings that date from the mid-18th century up through to the mid-19th century. There are a variety of buildings, people's homes, outbuildings, a tavern, a schoolhouse, a church, a blacksmith shop. And we use these structures today to talk about the history of our county. And our next, our sister site just up the road, thank you, is the Cornelius Lau House. The Middlesex County Museum, this wonderful Georgian mansion, which was built in 1741. And we use it to talk about the history of the home, the family, the community that they were a part of, Raritan Landing. But it's also a space where we do exhibits about New Jersey history. So if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. I wanted to point out first that sort of the old way of us doing business. For many years, the way we operated, we had very limited hours at our site, and we had guided tours. I believe they used to be at like 1:30. You could show up and you'd get a guided tour. The tours were often long, and I fear they were probably a little boring as well. We may have done more to turn people off of history than inspire them. I was surprised if our visitors didn't want to have their own revolution over the tyranny of our tours. So it was a hard look at what we were doing, being honest about what we were doing, and to see if there were ways that we could change to create a better experience for our visitors. And we looked at the various models that we had. How were we doing our programs? How were we doing our exhibits, our tours, our very interpretation, and looked to try and create a more dynamic experience for people that were coming to visit the site. This included putting living history, interpretive platforms at the site. As the slide showed, we have a pretty robust Revolutionary War interpretation. We have, Amy, if you could go to the next slide, the baseball team. We have a baseball team, the Liberty Baseball Club, which plays at the site and also travels around. The next slide, please. We have a different historic crafts that were traditional to central New Jersey. We have a print shop. This is our master printer, Rachel Lee, who's operating a press from the 1890s. The next slide, please. Cooking demonstrations. The next slide as well, please. Music. We even have, if you go to the next slide, we have a gravestone carver carving traditional imagery that was found on gravestones throughout central New Jersey and parts of New Jersey as well. We've started in the fields adjacent to the village, agricultural interpretive platforms with both horse-drawn and early motorized equipment. And just so you know, that's me riding the tractor. I don't wear a tie every day to work. Sometimes I'm out there in the field doing work as well. So this has really created a different experience for people coming to visit the site. It's much more alive. And it's alive with people who are passionate about what they're doing and how they convey that to the folks that they interact with. So the very concept of how we provide the tours has changed. And as Cheryl has pointed out, there's a diversity in the tours. You can still have a guided tour. They're not as long as they used to be, but we still, obviously, we offer that. But we also have self-guided tours where you can explore the site at your own leisure, and again, interacting with the various living history people. Again, folks who are very passionate about what they're doing. We've shifted our program models as well, and if we go to the next slide, I believe, yes, thank you. Our programs were almost entirely dominated by lecture-style programming, where folks would sit in a room. We had various lectures. We could accommodate at the most up to about 80 people. But we shifted. We still do that. There's still a need for that, but we also shifted to larger events. That had many different types of activities taking place. Here's a demonstration of firing a cannon. We layered in family fun activities. In fact, we set up a tent that was just for children's crafts and areas where families could come and kind of crash, and kids can be kids and do their own thing there. We brought food trucks in as well. To really make it feel like an event that you could spend the day at. And again, also providing those connections to what's in the area. If you don't want to stay for our food there, what are the restaurants that were nearby, and so forth. We've also looked at our exhibits. If we go to the next slide. This at the Cornelius Lau House, we're trying to create different exhibits about topics that are, again, we feel that are meaningful, that are making significant contributions to the field. This is the latest exhibit at the Cornelius Lau House, Mid-Century New Jersey, the Garden State in the 1950s. Just a fun time period to talk about, and one of which there's been great change to discuss throughout New Jersey, and including everybody's story in part of the exhibits that we do, giving voice in many cases to individuals whose voices were often muted historically. Our two docents, Caitlin on one side and Algernon on the other, again, talking and providing history on that time period in New Jersey history. And also how the experience of different cultural groups were related, trying to be relevant in what we're saying. The experience of African Americans in the 1950s were obviously different than Caucasians during that period. So, it's trying to prevent that big story and making it relevant to everyone that comes to visit. We expanded our hours. We currently have staff on site 7 days a week. From May through October, Wednesday through Sunday, we have our living history team on site. We offer late hours over the summer. So we've expanded the hours as well. We have good support, as I mentioned earlier. We as a county government, we have great support from across the different departments in what we do. Things too, as far as safety, all of our core staff are trained in first aid, CPR, AED certified. We go through an evaluation process, as Cheryl had mentioned, and also to hit on a lot of the points that Cheryl has pointed out. We check in that evaluation process both what the public is telling us. We check the online sites like TripAdvisor, Google, Facebook, which are great, right? Those are the unfiltered comments, and there's much that you can learn from that. And we also look at what we're not doing well. I'm the first to say things that I think we're doing right, but also that we aren't doing right. We have terrible signage that we're trying to remedy. We have outdated exhibits in some areas we're trying to deal with. Our website is rather poor. So, I'm the first to criticize the site as well and what we're not doing. But ultimately it's taking in all of those factors, and that's what guides how we look at our budget. It guides our planning, and ultimately how we can best serve our visitors. And all this has led to an increase in visitation. 6 years ago, both sites had 6,000 folks annually. Last year, we hit 25,000 for both sites. And a lot of that is attributed to the new models that we've instituted, the extended hours, and especially the different programs. We can do programs now that, you can get thousands of people with these larger events than in some of the other traditional formats. And finally, I want to conclude with just some thoughts on and if we can go to the last, thank you. Provide some thoughts on the current crisis. Certainly there's been a push for online content and resources, and that's great. And in fact, seeing all of that, it makes me realize it's something we should have been at our site doing all along, is producing more online content. And that clearly is a direction and a path that we're going to be on. But at the end of the day, too, we are historic sites, and I think our greatest value is that physical connection to the past that we provide visitors. And as we work to reopen, we are at our sites making sure that all protocols are in place with social distancing, the reduced capacity, masks, the way we're sanitizing the spaces. We both have an outside vendor that does a monthly deep cleaning, sanitizing of the space, as well as our sort of daily sanitizing and cleaning of the spaces. Because I feel that if we can't make the public feel safe about visiting, they're simply not going to come. And that ultimately is going to have a disastrous impact on many levels for the history community. So I think in the current crisis and preparing for visitors, we're trying to think in terms of them feeling safe when they come to visit as well. Thank you very much.
So Mark, you gave some great comments, and I applaud you for all of the changes you've made, and it surely is working, obviously, with the consideration of increased visitation. And I would hearken to probably think that it's also increased your revenue generation as well. And, and looking at then that as a broader context of connectivity for the community, but also making sure that people see that this isn't static. It's really got a lot of different elements to it. I'd love to come back and see the baseball team, but I'd also like to, I love the historic crafts piece and the print shop, and you've intrigued me on with several of those programs that you're offering. And also the thing that I was taken back by is the visual element. And I think that that's really significant for us to consider as well. When you see people doing things such as, being in the field, and that just draws people in. So rather than just having a building that, maybe, as it always is, having activity around it really is that kind of engagement strategy. So I applaud you for all that you're doing. And I want to just follow on that with some additional strategies for readiness, because I think we need to consider where we are. And as Jeff said, 2026 is going to be here before we know it. And for his purposes, as we start to look at a very global environment, it takes longer to attract international visitors and other kinds of elements. So we're really needing to look at how we can be visitor ready and offering those incredible experiences as soon as possible. So I'd like to just kind of focus on some of the challenges that we saw in our initial report. And I think these are considerations that we all need to be very mindful of, whatever platform, whether you're an attractor or you're not visitor ready yet. We can't say static because the customer doesn't say static. And so the first is inconsistent quality. We've talked a lot on that. And I hope you've had some thoughts about maybe how you can indeed look at expanding your hours or days of operation, or even scheduling programming on a consistent level so that you can then schedule staff or volunteers that can provide those kinds of experiences that allow you to be marketed on a regular basis. The second, though, is something that I think is become much more evident, certainly in the last several months, that we need to be very inclusive. We've even recognized this in both the preservation segment as well as the tourism industry, that we are not necessarily very diverse, and we need to do a better job at including all races and ethnicities so that people feel connected and involved in this. And we need to also make sure that we are providing, as Mark said, you know, all the stories, not just the ones that maybe have been taught in the past, but from every perspective, because that gives us a better understanding. I believe it also provides us a wonderful opportunity, especially in New Jersey, to talk about the conflicts, talk about what our forefathers did to get this new republic formed. It was messy, and New Jersey was at the heart of that. And to be able to share those very relevant stories that then translate to what's going on today, I think is a great opportunity for the state and the individual sites. And then to make sure that we are documenting return on investment. You know, that great report that talked about the economic impact of heritage tourism in New Jersey, but, you know, where can we go? How do we document that? And, you know, I think Mark's comments about, you know, how increasing visitation and having that attribution is very important to make sure that we are then growing heritage tourism, but more importantly, that we're investing in that resource stewardship that allows it to be around for future generations as well. Next slide. So one of the things that I was taken aback by, and if you don't know Destinology, there's a series of reports that PGAV Destinations out of St. Louis does as a research program, and they do an annual Voice of the Visitor. They're very much focused on attractions. They've done a lot of work with aquariums and zoos and theme parks, but they've also done work in historic sites and other and cultural attractions and art museums. And they looked at the profile of visitors, especially to historic sites and landmarks, and recognized that whites visit 19 percentage points more than minorities. And as we look at even what's happened recently with demonstrations and the Black Lives Matter movement, we need to be mindful that our sites need to be inviting and safe and relevant for all citizens, and that we offer those opportunities for engagement and dialogue, the things that historic sites really have such a great opportunity to do, more so than maybe other kinds of attractions or institutions. And I was really, Mark, I applaud you for that mid-century New Jersey program where you are looking at different voices, different stories, because that's the starting point we all need to look at. And so we can actually help fill in what maybe lived in history books. I'm reminded that, you know, when I was in college, one of my favorite courses was a history class, and it really actually turned me on to heritage tourism because I had a lot of I thought it was all names and dates and didn't really connect the dots. And this particular history course gave the book, The Good Old Days They Were Terrible, as my textbook. And I'm reminded that what it did was it helped talk about the conflict that led up to those seminal dates and events. It helped give a context and the story behind that event. And that is what people look for as far as helping to understand, how did something happen? Where did it happen? And why this place? And that's where New Jersey certainly can talk about why it's the Crossroads and why it owns so much of the American Revolution story. Next slide. So how do we look at building diversity, equity, inclusion? And I think it starts certainly with the board. I also think that it's looking at staff and volunteers and programs. It's in every component, and how we make sure that the target audiences that you want to reach, the target audiences that maybe are part of your mission, the target audiences that are important to your stories are reflected in all of these elements. You know, because let's face it, we often look at those visuals or those videos or those ads or others that reflect like us. And so making sure that we are then hearing all those voices, seeing all those voices is very important to making sure for credibility standpoint, if nothing else. Next slide. We also have some other challenges, and I think that, you know, these are pre-COVID numbers. I've heard recently that we may lose 30% of our museums. We may lose 30% of nonprofit organizations. We may lose 30% of restaurants, you know, and that is a very sad outcome of this pandemic. But it also then is something that those of us who are working through it need to be conscious of, that we have then an obligation to make sure that we not only survive, but we thrive, and that we are then providing the very best possible experiences to everyone that we can, and to be able to make sure that we are around for future generations. So looking at how we can fit into a broader context, and that piece of the puzzle is critical. It's also looking at the fact that, you know, visitors pre-COVID were really, you know, participating in fewer attractions. And part of that is the flexibility. Part of it is also that we were very overprogrammed. You know, people had very busy schedules. And so looking at people, you know, that wanted just to, when they got in a car and went on a road trip, they didn't want to necessarily be locked into a 1:30 time slot. They wanted to have more flexibility. So helping people understand how they can experience your particular attraction and site is important, and why, you know, that you know, they need to come and be prepared to spend a couple hours if that's what's going to be appropriate to deliver. And also, again, this, I think, unfortunately, is a sad state that it's a one and done experience. But it goes back to that point about, if you're not offering a reason to return, you know, if you're not offering something new, then people will find other places to go. And you lose that opportunity then to have them bring back, especially if it's a resident, you know, a New Jersey resident that may be bringing, visiting friends and relatives. If they've already been there, you know, they're going to look at other places to go. So making sure that we consider where and how to expand those experience offerings so that there is a reason to come back. I think art museums have done a great job because they have changing exhibits often. We need to make sure we're doing the same thing and offering those kinds of experiences, and whether it's the kinds of amazing experiences that Mark's offering, and on a variety of levels, or just making sure that there is a rotating exhibit that is on a particular theme, is critical to that repeat visitation. And then again, we have to look at the impact from the COVID-19 epidemic. Next slide. I do think we have to be conscious of just the seriousness of all this. And I know many of you are facing situations where it has personally affected you. And I am hopeful that, you know, we can all muddle through this and come out with a better new normal. But I'd like to quote Mark Cuban, who commented early on in a webinar I participated in March, right when the COVID was happening and lots of closures. And he said, you know, we need to use this time to really reflect. We need to use this time to regroup, and we need to use this time to reset. And maybe there are things we need to be doing differently that allow us then on the back end to, you know, when we are ready to travel, and to Mark's point and Jeff's point, that we can then move forward with confidence, and that we can provide our customers with a better experience, maybe trying some things that we had not planned to do but have the time to do now. And then also looking at how we can really make sure we're engaging those that are ready. Next slide. You know, the mask has become a symbol for safety. And I think we all need to be mindful of, you know, customer service mindset in a post-COVID-19 world. One of the most requested elements that visitor centers today are receiving is, where can I go where I can, you know, that are practicing safe guidelines. And so I think that is, to Mark's point, to Jeff's point, we need to be mindful of how we can ensure that we are providing that safe experience. Next slide. And, you know, this is the mindset. you know, it's been a long 4 months for many people. And I think people are tired of being, you know, shelter at home or want to get out. Especially, I saw something from a friend of mine who is a hugger that says, please take pity on me. This is a struggling time. So it has both emotional as well as a physical aspect to it. And so how we can help people, you know, calm their anxiety, especially as they get out and experience sites or want to go to historic sites, having outdoor activities maybe initially, looking at how we can really build that customer and consumer trust, will then make sure that people will remember that as they think about sites in future. And that is certainly something that I think as we look at, you know, more homeschooling, looking at how people are working more remotely, how can you offer a respite for them? How can you offer a safe space for them to go and have a opportunity for enlightenment and transformation that breaks up their day or provides a opportunity for gathering? Next slide. A lot of these I know you're already practicing, but I think it is critical for us to consider as we look at how to move forward. And the irony is not lost on me that, you know, we talked so much about the need for immersive experiences and to have that engagement and those touch points. And now we're having to rethink about it. You know, removing some of the touch points initially so that it's more hands-free and reduced touch points, but there's still ways to engage. And I was talking to a museum expert last week, and they're looking at how they can use like floor maps or look at, you know, wallpaper, looking at tactile ways to have imagery and other kinds of things brought to light through interpretation, and still sensory experiences, but just doesn't require that touching element. So things of those kinds of things. I also think it's a really great opportunity for those of you who are member-based or want to engage with other new audiences to have coffee and conversations with people, you know, small group opportunities, maybe even online, to just share information, to bring those kinds of interactive moments together. Looking at social media, I know many of you are on Facebook and on Pinterest and Instagram, and making sure that that content is really relevant and consistent and frequent, because that really also gives Jeff and his team a lot more to be able to use as they go out and market and be able to help. We've also talked about making sure that your local tourism bureau is involved and that your DMO is able to promote visitors. Use this time to talk with them about what their plan is for recovery. Talk to them about their plan for, you know, next fiscal year, how you can participate, and how to make sure that their staff is aware of what you're offering. It's a great time to have those kinds of conversations and setting the stage for a more robust 2021, hopefully. And then looking at how residents being a visitor in their own community. I know many places have focused on local restaurants and how you can support local restaurants, but I think it's also important to look at even how people have instituted like a 1% fund when you go to a restaurant, and that you're tipping extra, but maybe that 1% also goes to historic sites or other kinds of places, so that you're conscious of how to help support, how residents can be a part of, you know, supporting those assets that they really value in your community. And as we talk about, you know, travel, most people are going to be driving. Most people are going to go closer to home. And I know that Jeff wants to make sure that all New Jersey residents stay in New Jersey and we don't have the leakage to other states. So helping to provide those kinds of experiences in those, did you know, those, you know, off the beaten path experiences that allow people to get out and drive the wonderful byways. I'd spent time on several of them. Those are the kinds of things that allow then a collection of, when people want to get away, that they can say, here's some safe spaces and things that we can do. Next slide. So, and I think it is important to go back again to, you know, the fact that general leisure travels also engage in heritage behaviors. And so where they may be motivated to just get out and of their home environment and explore something else and have a change of scenery, or they may be going to visit friends or relatives, they're still going to be maybe looking at some of these activities. And these are ways, as Jeff mentioned, you know, the local regional cuisine. I know you've got a great ale trail, looking at all of those kinds of elements that can be pooled together in an interesting itinerary that help people go from point A to point B and have a chance just to explore. That's going to be very significant in helping expand that linger longer mentality. And it can start with New Jersey residents as that way of, you know, so that they discover new places that maybe they've never seen before, or maybe they haven't seen in a while, and helping them revisit and looking at how heritage sites are all involved in that. And it's also a great opportunity too to think about thematic, you know, maybe especially with the, I know that a lot of people are going to be focusing in September on the Underground Railroad, but also, you know, the passage of the 19th Amendment, the 100th anniversary. So focusing on places of women and being able to pull all those together and having that for, you know, women's groups or clubs or other ways in which you can target that audience and be able to attract people to get out and explore. Next slide. And I share this because it was one of the things that I think brings it all together as far as what people really like to do when they go out. And so as you think about how you're connected to not only other historic sites, think also about how you're connected to other things that travelers engage together in really interesting ways, whether they have 4 hours, whether they have 24 hours, whether they have 48 hours, whatever that may be, looking at how to pull it all together, you know, focusing on the, you know, shopping. Where can they go and find something that's made in New Jersey? Where can they focus on, you know, looking at a concert if we get to that point in some future, or maybe there's an amphitheater, or I know that there's been actually extending that time and helping them understand heritage and cultural in its broadest. And then also not forgetting about outreach and nature, because as we look at COVID recovery, certainly something that we are seeing is one of the most important motivators for travelers these days is getting out into nature. How can heritage walks be interpreted, or story walks, or other kinds of ways to bring history to life in these environments? Those are critical ways to think about heritage activities in new ways. Next slide. So looking at how to do these itineraries, I think it's important, as we mentioned, what's time, and not had a chance to get out, maybe invite those other businesses to your facility, have a round table, to have through, to have a share about, you know, what you can offer to their patrons, and then also looking at how you can actually help them. As those kinds of cross-marketing opportunities, I think, are really significant as we look at expanding the linger mindset. Also, as we mentioned, teams and making sure that we have a very diverse audience. We're make sure that we are looking at even how to experience revolutionary rights in different ways, bicycle tours, looking at other multimodal, you know, RVs, where, you know, RVs are going to increase in popularity, already have. And so is there an RV park nearby? Are you RV friendly? So being able to focus on those kinds of elements will give you an additional strategy. And then making sure that too, we do focus on just different strategies of the storyteller. not just always from the one particular lens, but looking at it from all different kinds of lenses. And I know that Janice is going to be very involved in looking at helping all these stories unfold, but thinking about what are your stories and how you can perhaps present a different perspective that makes it very engaging and inviting. You know, I remember when I was at the African American Museum in Boston, and one of the things that they focus on is how they use high school students to actually create their tours. And high school students have a very different perspective sometimes on, you know, what they want to know and what they want to learn, but it becomes then a very key part of their interpretive strategy. And then that allows them to offer this to 10th grade school classes and others because it's from a perspective of that audience. And so thinking about how, what audience that you want to attract, but also how you can engage them. Next slide. So I think we've got time now, Janice, for a couple questions, and I think there's been a couple things come up. So
great. And one question was sent, I think, just privately to me, which was a question from Mark, which is, are the reenactors and craftspeople paid at East Jersey Old Town? Maybe you can address that, Mark, if possible. And then we have some other stuff for Cheryl and a couple of things that I would like to address as well.
Sure, it's a mix. We have both full-time staff, which is our core staff. We have seasonal in-county staff. We have people we contract out with as well. We have volunteers, so we run the full gamut, and our historic demonstrators fall within that.
Great, thank you. And then I guess there's a question that everybody sees in the chat from Paul Solstice, which is, he's a sole member of the interpretive staff at a historic site. How can I adapt the customer journey map to my visitors? And then a second question, but maybe we can do the first one. Cheryl, would you like to address that? Or Jeff, would you like to address that?
Well, as I mentioned and Cheryl reiterated, the first step would be to talk to your local destination marketing organization in your area, because what they'll do is pull together like-minded people that are interested in this, and will find that complementary attraction or hotel or restaurant to include you in that in that tour. So I think it's important that you stay in contact with the local organization, or certainly reach out to my office. The New Jersey Division of Travel and Tourism, visitnj.org is our website, and I can certainly help steer you in the right direction.
Cheryl, do you have anything else to add to that?
I would just say that, also think about what you want the customer to know about your site, and then make sure that that is shared consistently across all platforms. And certainly that then can be that emphasis that Jeff and his team or your local DMO can ensure that they're helping to promote, so that there's not a disconnect between promotion and an on-site experience, that brand promise. So making sure that all that comes together. And I'm glad to follow up with more information later too.
Great. And then the second part of that is the key recommendation of the visitor readiness assessment was developing heritage trails like the Boston Freedom Trail. How can we adapt this model to the unique and very different travel and transport infrastructure of New Jersey? And that is something that Crossroads is working on, with the idea that, due to COVID-19, but also just an interest in people being outside. People want to be outside, they want to explore things, and there's a lot of history that we can tell on trails in New Jersey. Cheryl, would you like to add to that as well?
I think you've nailed it. That's exactly right. Looking at, how can people learn with their feet? Or, as people get more comfortable. I mean, certainly by 2026, I hope we're using public transport again, you know, how they can do it through various stops along, you know, New Jersey transport. I mean, you know, and, you know, public transportation. So especially for international visitors, you're very used to public transportation. You know, are there stops along the way where you can get off and you can do a linear route or, you know, a train? So, and then bicycles, you know, I think again, just being multimodal is the key.
Jeff, anything to add on that?
Got to remember to unmute. No, I think you both hit the nail on the head. Nothing to add. That's great advice.
Okay, well, if people have other questions, please continue to post them. I want to thank you, first of all, our speakers, and on behalf of Crossroads, the American Revolution staff who are participating here today, and board, and our many heritage partners. And we're really thrilled about the fact that we've been able to hear from you, Jeff, about how New Jersey can be best in class in customer service and how heritage tourism should be a top reason to come to New Jersey. And Cheryl, obviously, you know, so much information that you've been able to provide for us, those wonderful tips about how we can be more customer focused and provide better customer service. And, you know, also how we can operate now during COVID-19 and other tips as well. And we're really thrilled that we had Mark with us today, who was able to give us an example of East Jersey Old Town and what's going on there. We hope to be able to highlight other of our partner sites in the future. And one of the things that Mark did talk about is the fact that, as you know, we are dealing with COVID-19, we need to be more online. And one of the things that Amy, who's our program manager at Crossroads, is taking a look at is the possibility of doing another workshop about, you know, highlighting some of the things that sites are doing in this area of being online and what they can offer as tips for that as well. Obviously, without missing that, what Mark so well stated, that we also want to have a physical connection to the past. I think there are a couple of other questions that are coming to me privately. One is, Jeff, there's a question about what we might expect that we would be able to spend on heritage tourism advertising as the anniversary approaches. And I know you may not have an answer for that right now, but maybe what you would hope would be able to happen moving forward?
You're right. I don't have an answer right now. We're still waiting to see what our budgets are going to be looking like because of the current situation. But we were lucky that the timing was interesting, that a month before we shut down in mid-March, we were lucky to get a $2 million increase to our budget. And we had allocated a fair amount of that to our PR firm, as well as social media for heritage tourism. We were going to certainly start with a media and PR campaign with, you know, getting the messaging out about, you know, how New Jersey is central to the Revolutionary War commemoration, and getting articles put in some of the journals and the the more mass market publications and websites about about the heritage tourism and the Revolutionary War time in particular. So we were going to start this year with more of a PR focus, as well as on the social media, to start creating, by working with you, Janice, and any of the folks that are here on this call, and certainly pull Cheryl in where we can, to start focusing on the itineraries and the names and what are the like stops, if you will, that someone that's coming out of New York for a day, someone that has 2 days, someone that's coming through South Jersey. How do we make you know, an itinerary and a tour map out of that. So that's what, you know, our focus was going to be for 20, which obviously we're pushing into 21 to get out there. So we're going to be active with that. You know, we're not big on commercials, if you will, TV commercials. We're more, we run the digital game. So you're going to see more of that working with Janice and her team on those types of initiatives.
Thank you. We're seeing a few more things coming in. Perhaps one focus should be on our state historic sites, which don't get enough attention, perhaps. I think that's what that's saying. I know that clearly, you know, we are working with the state historic sites as well. You know, they're among our heritage partners as well.
And Janice, if I could add to that, that was, you know, my point about, you know, to use the terminology of the great report. Yeah, you know, everybody knows about the attractors, but how do we bring the community resource category, you know, into the fold? And the idea is to certainly, you know, focus on them, you know, when we're looking at an itinerary in a particular area, to again include other attractions, include the restaurants and really cool music scene to, you know, keep people there longer. The longer they're there, the more they're going to stay engaged in that particular area. So that is the idea. I mean, use an attractor as kind of a hub and spoke, you know, analogy that, okay, that's going to bring them in. Now, how do we keep them there longer?
And I think what you've talked about before in our conversations, Jeff, is the fact that we want sites to think about if somebody is going to a site down the road, that doesn't take away from their site. It might encourage people to go visit more sites, experience the restaurants, and do more in the community.
Right. And I want to pull the wineries and the breweries into this as well. That's you know, that's a very popular, you know, attraction right now. And our wineries and breweries and distilleries around the state are doing a great job of, you know, putting outside events and seating and music, and just by their nature, they're in areas that are close to some of our heritage tourism sites.
There's a question that came to me privately for Cheryl. So many of our cities only have one or two historic sites still standing, but still have a really extensive revolutionary story. How can existing sites work with cities and local businesses to help tell those stories too?
Well, I think there's a couple different ways. I think that, you know, to Jeff's point, you could be the hub and then have people be able to, you know, is there a trail that you could actually mark that takes people to those various locations, and, you know, either that there's an app or a QR code or something that can help them connect to that place. And, you know, it also then really makes it even more important that the places that are still standing continue to stand and serve as a focal point for that outreach. So they become that little that local hub. I think the other thing is how all the stories connect, and that goes to Jeff's point. Even like a winery or what may be standing on that particular place where there was a historic site, you know, that's an opportunity. Is there a historic photograph that could be, you know, used as a mural or used as an overlay in some way to help bring that place to life? Again, helping people navigate all those various elements. So being creative and helping to help everybody understand, you know, what was there and while what is. I give a reference to an Underground Railroad site along the Ohio River in Marietta, Ohio, that it's now a restaurant, but they actually use historical photographs on their wall as a way to show what happened during that, you know, time of passage. So helping those places that are maybe not historic sites understand their own history that becomes a really great role for that community resource or that whatever standing historic site is now.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank everyone for participating today. I also want to thank the Roma Bank Community Foundation for making this possible, along with the National Park Service, which allows us to reach out to our heritage partners and provide this really rich content. And I hope we're going to be able to do more of that. I see one other quick thing before we close off. That state-owned and operated historic sites need more of the tourism media spotlight, and their varied and diverse stories that often don't get enough push or support from the state. So, anyone have any comment on that?
Work on it.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, just it's a valid point. And, it's something that's, that we need to work on and be stronger about.
Yep, and that's what we hope to do, to continue to do. We're efforting through our outreach and promotion and to do that, and obviously hope to do more as we move forward. So again, really thank you all for your time. We will be posting content from this, so if people were unable to join us today, they'll have an opportunity to listen and hear. And we will be doing, again, more of this. And we hope this is going to continue our conversation. And again, for future workshops, we will be highlighting some of the things that some of our other partners are doing in the state. So thank you all very much for participating.
Thank you.
Okay, great.